Hello, I'm Ken Wagner, and I'm here today to address the topic, why NALMS? Linking government, the private sector, and citizens to responsibly manage lakes. I was asked to address this topic, because I lived it. My career is pretty much coincidental with the existence of NALMS. The Clean Water Act started a little before I got into this, but not way before. I was pretty well aware of it, and I've studied it quite a bit, even had a whole course on it back in grad school. Fascinating stuff. So a little background for anybody who's not real familiar with it. The Clean Water Act was passed in 1972. It was major bipartisan legislation. It acknowledged the value of water resources and set a framework for management. It's something we can only marvel at today. The Clean Water Act needs some work, or maybe a whole new version. I have no idea how we would get that with our current state of affairs. The accompanying regulations for the Clean Water Act took up to about a decade to develop, and the act was amended twice, 1977 and 1987. So we did get something done even after the initial passage. But there are still a lot of loose ends that would be nice to tie up now. We have learned a whole lot, partly because of this act, and then following through on the different things it required, gave us new insights and told us where we needed to learn more. The further evolution has been mostly through regulatory adjustments, though. Again, it's going to be really hard to ever pass such a sweeping piece of legislation in this country. But there's lots of little tricks that have been used to make these adjustments. A classic one is from, I think, 1995, where they decided that the definition of a point source could be extended to pipes or even curb cuts where stormwater runoff entered a system. Consequently, they turned what had been a non-point source into a point source, which allowed them to pull it under a permit system. We haven't quite figured out how to do that with agricultural land yet, but that may be next. Rules, incentives, and other direction have been passed down through the states, most of which have their own sort of versions or offshoots of the law or corollaries. And there's a lot of variability across the United States. So it does make sense that we wouldn't use the exact same identical setup in, say, a highly agricultural state versus a highly urban state versus a very forested state. There are different problems in different areas, or at least different levels of problems that require slightly unique approaches. Now, the Clean Lakes Program, or Section 314 of the Clean Water Act, was fully functional by 1980. There were major Federal Register guidance on how to conduct Clean Lakes Program activities that came out in 1980. But most states didn't wait for that, and the government encouraged it. They had precursors or different ways they did it. I actually started working for the state of New Jersey full-time in 1977 as part of their Lakes Assessment Group. So it was going on before 1980, but we were still sort of feeling our way along as to how to go about it. The outline for assessment of a lake from 1980 remains more comprehensive than anything we've done since. People talk about TMDLs or watershed-based plans. Those are skeletons compared to what the Clean Lakes Program actually pushed at the beginning. It was much more comprehensive. Part of that was we didn't know as much, so we didn't know how to hone in on the key details. But boy, we learned a whole lot doing this work. Money was available for research, for assessment, and actually for management. I mean, you got money to do dredging projects, money to further oxygenation, phosphorus inactivation, and in watershed management techniques as well. There was more research in the 1970s probably than anything else. Demonstration projects started up and were very plentiful in the 1980s. Early, it was an in-lake focus. What do you do in the lake to clean it up? Later, really still in the 80s, the watershed focus kind of took over, and the pendulum swung that way, and we became very watershed focused to the point where they did away with a lot of the in-lake support. We're still trying to achieve balance, but I do think it's swung back, and at least those people with some real experience in lake management realize you need to both work in the watershed and in the lake. Government redirection occurred in the 1990s. Fewer dollars were available. We had more regulation. It got to be harder to do things. There was an overemphasis on the watershed approach, and you can find that written in EPA documents and a lot of state corollaries. This is not just an impression. It's there in writing. People would say things like, you can solve all lake problems with watershed management. Simply not true. There's a lot that goes into holistic lake management. And anytime you take one piece of that and put it up on the pedestal and focus on it, you're probably missing the big picture. Section 314 funding was discontinued as of 1996. It was reduced in a lot of the states thereafter. I find that a real travesty. I know NALMS worked very hard to keep it in. I think from 1991 to 1995, we were in front of Congress every year explaining why it was so important to keep this. There's a whole lot of reasons why it went the way it did, and I can't spend too much time on them in this talk. But a lot of it had to do with the failure to really properly document what we were getting from the Clean Lakes program. And then again, this renewed emphasis on working in the watershed. Oh yeah. So why NALMS? Why was NALMS formed? What was the whole idea here? And I've shown you a few historical pictures there. Guy center on the left-hand side is Dennis Cook. He's one of the founders. To his right, I believe, is Ken Reckow. I can't remember the other person there. It was actually the first secretary, I believe. You got Bob Carlson right there in the middle picture. Bob Johnson and Lisa Connolly, both past presidents who were involved early on. Bob Johnson was really the EPA guy. If anybody's the father of NALMS, it's him. I don't know if maybe he's the godfather of NALMS and Denny's the father, but very, very instrumental. Of course, Gene Welch, other folks that are around for a long time, longer than me, were involved. I was a 25-year-old kid at this conference in 1980 when NALMS was formed. I had nothing to do with it actually happening other than signing up right away to support it. And of course, the rest is history. It's become so thoroughly entwined with my own career, sometimes hard to tell them apart. Government and academic leaders recognized early on that government agencies were not really set up to either spread the word or provide the actual management effort necessary to manage our lakes. They could support it, but they weren't really going to be the likely ones leading the charge, and they weren't the likely ones to make the connection with the citizens. Existing professional societies also were not very well suited to addressing actual management involving all the stakeholders. Again, I have been involved in the American Fisheries Society, the Association for the Science of Limnology and Oceanography, the Aquatic Plant Management Society, the American Waterworks Association, and several other groups throughout my career. I cannot imagine a fisherman, just somebody who likes to fish, showing up at an AFS conference. I can't imagine a person who lives on a lake and just wants to know more showing up at an ASLO conference. It's probably happened at one time or another, but they're not really welcome. They're not really part of that. The focus of those groups is different. It's not a melting pot. That's what NALMS was all about, creating this one umbrella, the one big tent that everybody could get under and hopefully move in the same direction. Unfortunately, it promoted more fistfights than anything else, but that's another story. There was a lot of money to support this. When NALMS was formed, it was perceived as an outreach tool, mostly for EPA, a melting pot for all things lake and water management. And we were really run out of Washington, D.C. Most of our money came from EPA, and that wasn't a bad thing. We were doing a lot in terms of educating people about lakes. But that's why NALMS was formed initially, although if you pay attention to the mission, it's a bit broader than that. All right, so NALMS in the early years. Again, founded in 1980 at the International Conference for the Restoration of Lakes and Inland Waters. It was preceded by two similar conferences in 1978 and 79, one of them right here in Minnesota. It was incorporated in Maine, but like I said, run mostly out of Washington, D.C. There was actually sort of a publications company that really formed the backbone of directing what would happen. They funneled the money to NALMS through EPA and really oversaw most of the construction or development of educational materials. It had a volunteer board representing a cross-section of the membership. It was pretty representative, I would say. I guess we're a rather white society, but women were involved right from the get-go. It was a good group of people who worked very hard on a volunteer basis on behalf of this new society. We had an annual conference going all the way back. Of course, after forming in 1980 and Ronald Reagan came to office and started cutting state funding, the first true NALMS conference was deleted or discontinued. And the second one, or what became truly the first one, wasn't until 1982. I missed that one. I haven't missed one ever since. Lakeline and lake and reservoir management followed as main functions within a few years. First issue of Lakeline is 1981. Lake and Reservoir Management kind of existed as proceedings of the conference from the beginning, but as a peer-reviewed journal, that's about 1985-86. And those were the main functions. Still true today to some extent, although we made a lot of other publications that supported lake management. Some of them are still highly relevant today. Some of them are outdated, but still contain some really important information. And again, here's a suite of lots of folks down here from way back. Denny Bokemeyer, who started the Certified Lake Manager program. Garth Redfield, who was the first editor of the journal. I think that's Denny Cook again talking to them. Bob Johnson again in the middle, and Matt Scott, another past president who's in his 90s now and still doing good work. Chris Holdren over there on the far right. Quite a few other folks across here. Ginny Garrison in the middle. A suite of 7 or 8 presidents who all got together in Denver in 1991. Eben Chesbrough and Gina. Oh, can't think of Gina's last name right now. But again, 2 longtime NALMS members that started this whole thing. And then, so many people throughout the years who have been instrumental in carrying this group forward. And NALMS matured. We cut many of our District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. ties in the early 1990s. We retained close relationships with the federal Clean Lake Program contacts, particularly in some of the regions. Tom Davenport, for example, Region 5, has been instrumental in NALMS over its history. And we developed a lot of direct state relationships. Those existed before, but we got closer. A lot of this comes to the advent of the midterm conference in Chicago, something that Bob Kirshner conceived and put on, where we'd gather in April every year to work on enhancing the state's lake management programs. A lot of things got done there to help improve programs across the country and in other countries. We expanded. Certainly Mexico and Canada were considered before, but I don't think they got nearly the emphasis they did in the later 1990s and beyond. We reorganized the board. We had 2 office moves. We got dedicated staff, and we developed more of an online presence, something we still need to do more of, I think. But we moved in the right direction. One of the other things that happened during this time is the National Lake Assessment was not conceived by NALMS, but was certainly hashed out in terms of detail, content, timing, and the goals at those midterm conferences in Chicago. The loss of Section 314 funding was probably the worst thing to happen in that period. It forced a greater reliance on conference revenues and membership, something we still struggle with today. But on the good side, it pushed us away from the government control and more into controlling our own destiny. Of course, some of the people that were important in that era of NALMS, Jeff Schloss and Steve Heiskery right there. There's Bob Kirshner and Rick McVoy at the 10th anniversary, and then Philip Forsberg and the late Tom Connery, all instrumental in NALMS over the last 20 plus years, maybe 30 years. All right, so how do we seek to meet the mission? What are the successes? Well, managing lakes and reservoirs, the manual basically on how to do this, and related supplements. There's one on monitoring, there's one on fisheries, a few other things, were pretty big milestones. Now these are, late 90s, early 2000s. Again, somewhat outdated, although a lot of the concepts are still absolutely applicable today. One of the very early ones, how to organize a lake association. We really need to redo that and put that out there because a lot of groups need it. We gave a lot of testimony to Congress, not just to save the Clean Lakes program, but trying to make legislators understand how important water resource management was. This is where we really integrated with the Clean Water Act. What parts are critical to lakes? Of course, we have to worry about the whole watershed, all the tributary streams. It really is a complete water management program when you're dealing with lakes. We had support of state programs, again, that enhancing the state's lake management programs thing at the midterm, but we had sessions at our conferences. We had issues of Lakeline devoted to it. We've had papers published in lake and reservoir management. It's been a big push for NALMS. The development of the National Lakes Assessment I mentioned already. Again, it's an EPA product. They handle it and work with the states on it, but NALMS was really helpful in the formative stages of that. We still do Lakeline, we still do lake and reservoir management. Both, I think, are excellent and useful publications, and we have high value conferences. I go to a lot of conferences, not lately, but throughout my career, I would have to say that I get more from the NALMS conferences because it relates so directly to what I do for a living, but also in terms of what it costs. Yeah, it's not cheap, but boy, it's worth it. I get things out of this that I wouldn't get any other way. And of course, probably the most important thing is the network established by NALMS. NALMS itself has a network where it can call on people all over to help people solve problems. And then each of us as members develop our own network. To some degree, it's your cohort, people that you're friends with, that you have a drink in the hospitality suite with, that you discuss all sorts of matters with, not necessarily just lakes. But at the same time, that whole overall NALMS network where you know that, hey, such and such did something on that last year. Let me call them up and find out how it worked. Or, oh, gee, yeah, I can put you in touch with these 3 people that have experience in what you're looking for. It's tremendous. In one of our Voice of Experience sessions that I ran for a number of years, Chris Holdren mentioned that because of NALMS, he doesn't need to be the smartest guy in the room because he knows where those smart people are and can find them and get the information he needs. That's what NALMS does for us. All right, seeking to meet the mission, the limitations. Yeah, there's always the downside. It's largely a volunteer organization. NALMS doesn't have a big staff. What we do gets done because people are committed to it. That's becoming harder and harder for folks. It's a busy world. There are generational changes and different focuses for people. I get it. But NALMS is a volunteer organization. If we want NALMS to do something and be important, we need to make it that way. Getting all the stakeholders under the tent, this is always an issue. I mean, membership in general, you want people, as members of the society, but beyond that, getting everybody to participate, being able to satisfy everyone is really challenging. Diverse viewpoints and interests translate into consensus building challenges. When I was president, I wanted us to make a white paper and come out with a position statement on some aspect of permitting. And we were talking about where these roles should best be vested in state and federal agencies. And we couldn't reach a consensus because people in some parts of the country felt very differently than people in other parts. We kind of had to agree that there's a disagreement here, that there's no right answer. We can't really come out with a position statement that's going to be very meaningful or cut across all the boundaries. So it's a challenge. Again, you get a bunch of limnologists together, a bunch of fishery societies, a bunch of water professionals. They're pretty much focused on one aspect of this. NALMS takes it all in. We've got everything from the homeowner that's worried about property value, the grandparents worried about their kids swimming, the water supplier worried about the quality of the water going to their treatment plant, to all us lake managers trying to meet so many different demands on the water resource. We don't have one focus. We've got a lot of them, and it's a serious juggling act. Section 314 funding, or lack thereof, is certainly a limit. It limits lake management in the United States of America. It limits NALMS as well. So it's an issue, and I'd love to see it come back. And the last one for fun is the tainted money. I love it. There was a lot of fighting early in NALMS about who we take money from. Where do you get this money from? You've got an herbicide company that made something that's now been pulled off the market, and they want to fund us for something. Do we want to take that money? Do we want to take government money when they get to say what the policy is going to be? It's all tainted money. Well, both Tom Gordon and Tom Connery said on separate occasions, and it may not have been original to them, but I loved it. The problem with tainted money is there tain't enough of it. They felt you take it and you do good with it. But those are debates that we have and probably still have to have. NALMS in the future. Well, this isn't really my topic. It was why was NALMS formed in the first place, but the dog with the bone or the cat with the string, I can't let this go. I think that NALMS has transcended being outreach for the Clean Water Act. Frankly, the Clean Water Act, while I can't say it's outlived its usefulness, is not as useful for what we need these days, which is really about non-point sources more than anything else. NALMS has to address issues beyond what the Clean Water Act can cover at this point. Organizations need to evolve with the times to meet their mission, and NALMS is no exception, and we have evolved. We need to evolve more. Maybe we need to regress in a few areas and do something better, but the bottom line is change is inevitable, and it's not a bad thing. You should embrace it and move in the right direction. Online digital presence is essential these days. Conferences, webinars, Lakeline, lake and reservoir management, interactive websites, all this stuff is important. We do it, we don't do enough of it. This whole conference should be virtual as well as in person. And I'm a big fan of the in-person events, but you can reach a lot more people online. And they're doing a good job of putting that together in this regard, and it's not easy. But the more we can reach out to people on the web, the better off we'll be. The better the quality of our publications, the better the information that gets out there. I've never had a complaint about our conferences. I think they do a super job. But we need to do more. It's that simple. We need to take clear stands on important issues. We need to expand the membership, and we need to cooperate with other organizations to increase our clout. All those things are happening. Those are things that the leadership at NALMS has done in recent years, and I'm proud of them for it. But again, more is needed. We need to maintain unbiased, sound science approach to the review and support developing lake management techniques. I am a big fan of saying that you don't throw out any tool from the toolbox. You don't throw away the hammer just because you hit your thumb once. You learn how to use it better. But it's absolutely true that we've got a lot of techniques out there that haven't really reached the true effective application stage, and yet they're being pushed, they're being marketed, they're being promoted as though they're as reliable as anything else. And that isn't really right. We have to be able to call it as we see it, but not discourage it, because I think a lot of these things do have a role, they do have a place, and they may become real mainstream helpful techniques. They're just not there yet, and claiming they are won't get the job done. Diversity and inclusivity is, a big set of buzzwords these days, and it sometimes, you get it desensitized and it rolls off. They're not mentioned in the NALMS mission, but the mission is to build partnerships for the sound management of lakes. Well, if you don't have enough partners, you don't get the job done right. We need everybody under that NALMS tent. We need the diversity and inclusivity. Again, I think we've done pretty well with gender relations in NALMS, at least as an organization. But boy, we're just awful when it comes to people with color. We've just not done the job. And really, I'm really big on urban lake management right now. There's a lot of people of color living in those urban areas that really, really need those lakes. And to get the people mobilized to do it, they need to see people that look like them as lake managers. That's tough to accept sometime, but I can't go in and tell these people what they should do and have them just say, oh yeah, Ken knows what he's doing, let's just run with it. They need to see this from within their community. So we need to pull in people from those urban areas that have traditionally not been part of NALMS to help carry the standard in those communities, because that's where NALMS is needed most right now. Some concluding thoughts. Much what we know about lake management has been generated by NALMS members, or revealed at NALMS conferences or in NALMS publications. NALMS members have been on the forefront of the development of lake management for the last 40 years. NALMS' mission to forge partnerships for sound lake management remains as essential today as it was at the start. Membership is critical, both for funding and for a greater and more diverse voice regarding what's needed to protect and enhance our lakes. We have to do better with that. And I leave you with the quote, which is just, well, you'll see, it's great. Just minimal paraphrasing here to make it fit. Running a society like NALMS is exceptionally difficult in these times of inflation and declining public and congressional support of science. But clean lakes are something everybody wants. Who speaks to the public, the planners, Congress, and the scientific community about lake management, research, and programs? Until NALMS, no one. Sound like something we heard recently? G. Dennis Cook, first NALMS president, in Lakeline, Volume 1, Issue 1, March 1981. Denny was pretty prophetic then. He could have said this yesterday and it would still apply. So why NALMS? Well, because lakes need it. NALMS is the preeminent organization for real lake management. Maybe not the research, maybe not water supply, maybe not fishery biology, but for lake management overall, NALMS is the organization. We always have been since our founding. We need to interact with the Clean Water Act and beyond to get our mission accomplished. Let's go for it.